Hi there, I'm Ahsan Ali Shaw, and you are watching me on YouTube and Facebook Live. Today we are going to talk about conjectures and the importance of measurement, how people conjectures without measurement and consider conjecture to be true. And when we talk about conjectures, conjecture is a theory or an idea of the fact, not the fact itself, with a very weak credibility. It depends upon the relevant facts that are likely to be true in order to prove the worth of conjectures. And let me explain it with an example. For instance, John applies for a marketing position in a company, and he mentions in his resume about the great marketing and advertisement uh, history and a lot of relevant awards in his resume. And no one in the company reads or verifies his claims, but the company offers him a job based on the conjectures that he has mentioned in his resume. And that's how conjectures work. And conjectures and the importance of measurement is our topic for discussion today. And my guest is Edward Konowicz, and he has joined us from Virginia, United States.
Yeah, hi everybody.
Hey
This,
there.
this sounds like a mundane topic, but it's an
Mhm,
important part of university learning, which used to
mhm,
be you were required to take philosophy. And a
mhm,
large part of philosophy was an examination
mhm,
of language and terms and methods of reasoning.
mhm,
What sort of destroyed philosophy was existentialism because it
mhm,
moved into absurdity and started to ask the bigger questions, which is more metaphysics. What's life?
mhm,
What's the nature of existence? But in the
mhm,
meantime, we have these language issues, which is how do we define conjecture? How do we define fact? How do we define legitimate argument? And a lot of
mhm,
people have addressed this in different
mhm,
ways, like presenting the straw man argument, which is it's wrongful to misrepresent someone's position and argue against it. And most people are familiar with the straw man, which is the wrongful debater misrepresents his opponent's viewpoint so he can argue against it. And I won't tolerate that. I actually blocked a Facebook friend because they misrepresented someone's argument. And not only I, but someone else pointed out to them, well, go listen to this again. You're actually saying the opposite of what that person said. And they wouldn't correct themselves. And I see this as a violation of ethics. If you're going to debate someone, you need to be able to understand their argument. Doesn't mean agree. And conjecture is important because we have to distinguish conjecture from fact, and it's not easy because conjecture and fact overlap. Basically, conjecture is a conclusion you obtain from limited evidence. Fact is a conclusion you obtained from a preponderance of evidence. So it's the amount of evidence, and who's going to decide the amount of evidence between conjecture and fact. So some facts are well established, some are not. And some people, they can't think anymore because their political leaders present facts that are not facts. I remember when Hillary Clinton, who is considered a bright academician, went to Wellesley College and did well in class. She uses language wrongfully. She would say vaccines, the use of vaccines is as good as and clear as the sky is blue. Well, the sky is not blue. It's blue during the day, black at night, and at sunset it can turn reddish. So the sky is colorless. And for Hillary to say, well, the sky is blue, that's not a fact. That's a
Hey, Amanda.
perception
Hey, Adam. Mhm,
that doesn't, yeah, hi, Amanda. as a perception that doesn't continue all day long. It
Mhm.
turns blue during midday, and it could be gray if it's cloudy, and the sky can be black with, little star twinklings at night. So
Mhm.
we have to examine what people say. Now, people can cover, well, you know what she meant, that
Mhm.
if you look up in the sky, it's blue, which is using conventions or using colloquial knowledge. But we have to be more exact than that. That's fine if you're having a conversation with your neighbor or your relative or people at work. But when you're a leader or
Mhm.
you're an expert, your words have to have more precision and accuracy. And what we're talking about here is how do we get some precision? Well, we get measurements to draw a lot of our conclusions, but the same measurement can come to different conclusions. For
Eh,
example,
eh,
go ahead, you want to say
Okay.
something?
Okay. When you assigned this topic, send me this topic, and I was wondering about the same thing, that it is a bit academic topic, but it is good that there should be someone talking about these things, because not only people usually don't know the difference and the precision and the delicacy and the differentiate how to differentiate between the substantial evidence and the conjectures and the hypotheses and all of these things. And there should be someone to talk about these things. And usually the conjectures are very much true in the political debates and the political discussion. So, as you mentioned in your example, that your friend misrepresented the facts of the other person, and perhaps it is not common in your part of the world, but here in my part of the world, it is a very common thing that people misrepresent the ideas and discussion of the originator often. Now it's
Yes.
your example. Mhm.
And many people on Facebook
Mhm.
have clarified this and also
Mhm.
mentioned character assassination,
Mhm.
which is ad hominem attacks in an argument are not valid. The
Mhm.
ideas are whether they're true or not, or substantiated evidence, is
Mhm.
not based upon the character of the person presenting the ideas.
Mhm.
I mean, a
And
criminal can say the truth, and an
mhm.
honest person can say something that's falsely assumed. So,
Now Adam has mentioned a very good question here. What is an expert? That
well, an expert is, and let's use really a good definition.
Mhm.
An expert is someone who has a good knowledge of the accepted field of study. For example, an expert geologist has a good knowledge of all the different types of rocks and theories on how they came about. And you can usually tell because you listen to them, you look up references, and the expert doesn't have to look up references. They have a
Mhm.
good command of the subject. Now, we're given people who are like Dr. Fauci or Fauci, who
Mhm.
who don't present facts to us, who don't present a good comprehensive knowledge of the field, and we're supposed to assume they're experts because others assume they're experts. Expertise is not based on consensus. And too much of the thinking today is based on consensus. Consensus is not conjecture, it is not fact. Consensus is just the way people think, which is not proof of anything.
Yeah,
So when we
consensus.
hear,
We can also say that consensus is the agreement among the like-minded person.
yeah, so
Mhm.
this whole idea of consensus is overrated. No great discoveries were made
Mhm.
via the consensus.
Consensus.
Yeah,
Mhm.
consensus is just simply what the mob or the group thinks.
Yeah.
And then they want to say, well, there's a consensus of people in a field. You say, well, there are people in the field that disagree, and it is not a vote. It's not whether the majority in the field agrees or not. Science or any subject, history, is not a vote. You
Yes,
don't
and
vote.
those who disagree, they are not part of the consensus. And consensus is among the like-minded, agreeable people. And if you agree with something, the mob agrees, and whoever disagrees, they kick them out. And those who agree, there's a consensus among the like-minded person who agree. Those who agree.
Okay. Adam mentioned
Mhm.
extensive experience with the
Yes.
question mark. And no, I don't think so. A person can have extensive experience like a horse
Mhm.
can have
Mhm.
extensive experience. It doesn't make the horse an expert.
Mhm.
What makes an expert is the comprehensive knowledge of the field of study and the debates and the different theories and able to discuss different positions in the field. And people will come along with there's only one truth, one interpretation is not true. It's like Big Bang is supposedly based largely on the redshift, that things are moving away from us. But the redshift could be also caused by scattering, which is the light loses frequency as it bounces off of things because it imparts some energy to what it bounces off, which is your light bounces off your car, but you can feel the heat on your car from the sun, which is the light bouncing off, has lost some energy, which is some frequency. So whether the redshift is from things moving away from us or for natural scattering in the universe, it's a legitimate question. And you're not given that. You're only given one interpretation, like the background radiation of about 2 or 3 degrees is supposedly left over from the Big Bang. But it could also be what is called quantum fluctuations, which are particles have a plus and minus possibility, and sometimes they appear and disappear. And which is space itself is almost like a substance. Now, people say, well, that's not accepted. I said, well, Einstein said that gravity bends space. So if space is being bent, it has some characteristics like a
Hey,
substance.
Melissa.
But I'm not going to hold Einstein as the ultimate source of knowledge. He presents a point of view. But I want to get back to
Yeah,
conjectures.
he agrees. We agree with him on something and disagree with him some on certain points, but he's not the someone to look up to every time to prove your fact. Some
Right.
of his facts, yeah. And Ali, you talk about expert, and I think expert is a person who is objective and look at things from the multiple angles. And if you're looking at it from one perspective, then I think the question on your expertise is questionable. The credibility of your expertise is questionable because you are focusing on one point. And I think that's how the propaganda also works the same way when you only look at one thing and avoid the other. I think these are so many things, they are just relevant to each other, but with slight differences.
Well, the problem is people are accepting conjecture as fact. They're not looking at substantiated evidence. And for example, Johnson and Johnson or Moderna or Pfizer, they so-called tested their vaccines, and people want to accept these measurements as facts, but they haven't been peer reviewed. Peer review is used incorrectly. It isn't people now read the study done by Pfizer. They weren't there when it was done. They weren't there testing where was saline, where was the placebos, who did what procedures. So we have no peer review. To read or question Pfizer is not peer review. What peer review is in science, and I'm going to be adamant about this, is someone else takes the vaccine and does their own tests. And doing their own tests, they see if the results are similar to what Pfizer, Moderna, or Johnson and Johnson did, which is you can't do peer review by reading. Or when you do a review by reading, that's not science. It's like, oh, I went to the play and I did a review of the play. Well, you have to perform in the play to make an
Be part.
assessment or of the actuality. And to have peer review, you have to, the term which they do not use anymore because it challenges their false reasoning, is replicate. You have to replicate the experiment and get similar results. It's not you read the experiment, it's not you question the pharmaceutical companies. You do your own experiment and your own study and see if you had similar results. And you may change some of the methods, how you determine placebos, double blind, and we don't have any questioning of it. Authority has become tyranny because you're not allowed to question method. And this is not only in the mainstream. I first used the vaccines as an example of improper use of peer review.
I
And
think
now I want to use the pineal gland. People keep saying, with no substantiated evidence, that the pineal gland is the third eye, and that if it calcifies, you lose your third eye. So, well, what evidence? How many autopsies have been done? How did you associate the third eye? What's the third eye? Telepathy? What do you feel specifically is the third eye? Inspiration, intuition, telepathy, ability.
consciousness.
Yeah. What do you think on that? And how is that associated by evidence, substantiated evidence with the pineal gland? I think it's a guess. I don't think it's based on autopsies. I don't think it's based on any knowledge. But people hear something many times and they think this is a preponderance of evidence because 1,000,000 people say the pineal gland is the third eye does not make it true. I don't care what book you read it in. I don't care how many times you heard it. It doesn't make it true. It's not a preponderance of evidence. If you showed me autopsies, if you showed me calcified glands and studies done on people's intelligence or their ability to do a specific function, then I will believe you, but I'm not going to take conjecture and assume it's as fact. So people are being programmed both by the mainstream and the controlled opposition to think incorrectly, to accept conjecture as truth.
Yes,
And,
and
and
I think one of the elements of propaganda machine is to repeat the conjectures. When you use the conjecture over and over again, day after day, year after year, then those conjectures and people, those who are uh, being fed these lies, they can consider those conjectures to be true.
yeah, it's a misuse of language,
Yes.
which is the news media and the schools have degraded the English language to the point where philosophy and much of I got a mosquito here. Watch. Much of philosophy used to be of language to examine terms and functions in a culture and use a better definition. And it's kind of magical. How do we use words to improve words? But we can. That's the amazing thing of life. I can say that you can't base scientific fact on one experiment. And you can't have what you call conflict of interest, which is Pfizer testing its own drugs is a conflict of interest. So certain words like replicating experiments, conflict of interest are avoided in the media. People are not allowed to use certain words because it begins to point out that what people are hearing are propaganda. And
Oh,
it's not just the mainstream propaganda, it's the
no,
controlled opposition propaganda, like the pineal gland. We
and
have to begin using reasoning, not repetition as a basis of truth.
yes, indeed, and
Propaganda uses repetition as the basis of truth.
yes, and you cannot present scientific facts based on the conjectures. You have to establish those facts based on the not one experiment, multiple series of experiments to prove the worth of the hypothesis.
Yeah, what the mainstream propaganda wants us to believe. A company can test its own product, and then people can read about it testing its own product, and that's peer review. No, that's not. Peer review is for the experiment to be replicated by a legitimate expert and see if they get the same results. It's
I
not
think
it's not reading. Peer review is not, we get this from the journals. The journals which have degraded. We don't have any scientific journals anymore. They're all crap. And reason why they're all crap is they pass around the article for people to review it. And the best they can do, because I know people who review for scientific journals, the best they can do is cite plagiarism where the author actually stole the information. Because the only legitimate review is for someone to replicate the study and see if they came to the same measurements. That's
and
the only review, that's replication.
yeah, since we're talking about scientific journals and peer reviews, and if you study 5 or 6 journals, have a comparative study, then you will realize that they're only rewriting most of the authors or those who are publishing their articles for the first time. They are just rewriting those facts, and so that it shouldn't fall in the category of plagiarism, and that's how they are avoiding it. And the peer reviews, when we talk about peer reviews, it's actually a consensus about among those companies, those who are launching their products, uh, consensus within the company, not among the other company. Or I think those pharmaceutical companies or having a consensus is for the same purpose, sell their products.
Yeah, and the thing is, we've seen the statistics have been biased, meaning just by an incorrect PCR test that's not reliable, and then by people not applying the same standard, which is if a person tests positive and they have not been vaccinated, they are considered to be a new case. If they have been vaccinated and test positive, they're not a new case until they are hospitalized. So the same standard is different. And so a scientist can point out these contradictions. But the fact is, it is fact, people believe the television and their political leaders, though they're being told what is incorrect. They do not have enough background in science and philosophy to see the contradictions in what people are doing. And the big thing is we use measurements, but not one measurement. You can't have a theory by one measurement by the company or the institution that's profiting from that measurement. That's not peer review. You have to have people who do not profit, who do not have a conflict of interest, replicate the experiment.
And there should be a
And
third party who is supposed to be doing the experiments. And if a company is doing the experiments, then their measurements are objectionable because they would do anything or they will go to any limits to prove their product to be the right so that they could sell it in the market.
Now, what is interesting is the term anecdotal.
Mhm.
Anecdotal is an incorrect term. It's too general to use in science. Let me give you an example. You hear your neighbor's cousin got a drug and died. Well, that's anecdotal. That's kind of, you would have to talk to the cousin. But if your son, daughter, mother, or father got a drug and died, that's not anecdotal. It's that whether that becomes fact is not based on science. It's based on whether a doctor says it's real.
Uh,
So all doctor has to do, you get a drug or a vaccine and you die, that's real information for your family. But it doesn't become science in today's world until a doctor agrees. So we have a lot of evidence, which is circumstantial evidence. Most of evidence is associative. You were at the scene of the crime. That doesn't mean they committed the crime. It means they were at the scene of the crime. We have their fingerprints. We have their DNA. That's beginning to associate that person with the crime. And when you have enough associated evidence, anecdotal evidence, you have enough circumstantial evidence associating the person with the crime at the location, then you can, with a preponderance of evidence, show it's guilty. So most scientific information or truth is really conjecture, but there's enough circumstantial evidence, there's enough association, a preponderance of association for us to now move from conjecture to theory or even fact.
and I
So
think
it's a matter of degree. It's not whether we have conjecture or fact. It's how much evidence, much of it is associative. And the medical profession, being corrupt and dishonest, is saying associated evidence is no longer valid. Well, their evidence is associated.
yeah, and
And because they say so, doesn't make it more real.
in today's world, conjectures are consensus. Scientific facts are the consensus of conjectures, and as you say, associative uh, uh, the facts. And if those facts are relevant, so they make it fact. And I think that's how it has been working in today's world. And so what are your final thoughts on conjectures and the measurements of
We got
importance
to
of
realize it's relative. We have to assess how much evidence, particularly associative, is there. We need different evidence. We can't just assume the pineal gland is the third eye. We cannot assume vaccines work just because Pfizer tested its own vaccine. We need a preponderance of evidence. Most of it is associated, and anecdotal evidence is not dismissed. If you take a drug and experience a side effect, that's fact. It's not anecdotal. If your mother and father or children take a drug and have a side effect, it's fact. It's not anecdotal. If your neighbor's cousin takes a drug and has a side effect, that's anecdotal because you can't verify the honesty of the persons. And now doctors are dismissing evidence for two reasons, which much of their evidence is based upon. One, they claim anecdotal. But if the anecdotal is personal experience, which is the doctor has given the drug to the patient and then see the side effect, that's not anecdotal. That's not associative. That's supportive evidence. So the system is trying to broaden too far the definition of associative and anecdotal when it's based on associative and anecdotal. And it's dismissing real peer review because peer review is others are replicating the experiment. They're not reviewing the paper. They're actually doing the experiment. And so
they're
we
doing
have
this.
a whole bunch, in conclusion, we have a whole bunch of graduate students, people with masters and PhDs PhDs today that are not replicating experiments, they're reviewing papers.
Yes.
They shouldn't get a
And
degree from reviewing papers. They
and
should
to
get a
some
degree by performing an experiment and testing a theory and looking at the results, not from reviewing papers. That's
yeah,
not peer review.
and I think to some extent I agree with you. Some of my friends have just recently completed their PhD degree, and I was having a discussion with them, and I asked them the same thing. And to some extent, you're right. They are reviewing the papers, and when you read 60 or 70 papers, then you come up with collective idea or something new, and they are publishing it in the scientific journal, and those findings or the collective idea or the collective conjecture doesn't fall in the category of plagiarism. So the reviews the reviewing the paper helps them to pass the plagiarism test, and the thing or the collective conjectures also fall in the category of novel idea, and this has been going on in the scientific community and in the scientific journal. And I think we have a great discussion on the conjectures, consensus, and the propaganda, substantial evidence, and the consensus. And and thank you, Melissa. Thank you, Adam. Thank you, Amanda, and other people for your wonderful comments. And if you have any questions, just leave it in the comment box below. I'll answer to you. Ed will get back to you as soon as he can. And thank you. Have a good day, good afternoon, or good evening, wherever you are.
Yeah, make your comments on my Facebook page underneath the link, because I can't get back into what's this called? This program. I can't get back into it and see the comments. So just if you have a question or comment for me, do it on my page.
Okay.
Because I can't get into StreamYard. I can't get back into StreamYard. Okay, thank you. And everyone
you.
have a good weekend, what's left.